Morning, everyone. I'm just getting organized here. I'll be with you in just one moment. Let's see. Okay, the first thing I'm doing is putting onto the YouTube channel the link so that you can join the conversation if you wish to. Uh, and by that I mean with us here on Zoom, which goes on to YouTube. If you do that, you're uh, committing to a recording of your whatever you say, and it is it's going to be kept forever on YouTube, probably. That's what I guess. So anyway, I hope that's all right with everyone. But anyway, I hope more people will register to to participate with us on a weekly basis. Um, okay, so today we're going to continue with this essay in this book, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. And it's edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. And this is volume one. And let's see, this essay is by Josephine Evitz Secker. Josephine Evitz Secker. And it's quite a provocative essay as it talks about Nietzsche and etc. And and so I want to go back and I'm going to read one paragraph that we read last week, and then I will go on. But this is the paragraph that contains the phrase "God is our heaviest wound," and so here's the sentence. Like many contemporaries, after the moderating rationality of the Enlightenment enterprise that supposedly calmed fevered souls, Jung was left hungry and cold. He repeatedly affirms his discontent with the merely scientific, the exclusively intellectual, being slave to explanation, usefulness, and meaning. He says he had become a victim of my thinking. I choke on my own knowledge. Faith in Logos, the saving word, reason and feeling, for him was shattered. Yet he was profoundly discomforted by the demand to do something, uh, to do without meaning. To quote, do without meaning, and have my joy of explanation taken away, unquote. More than most, he recognized the longing that made humans cry out for the word which has only one meaning and no other, so that you escape boundless ambiguity, who have to find satisfaction in the words that oscillate between nonsense and supreme meaning, to entrust myself to confusion. And yet he must also obey an irresistible, quote, urge toward forbidden knowledge, unquote. In this disorienting epistemological condition, he is called to waiting, yet, quote, I wait without knowing what for, unquote, fated paradoxically to be, quote, on the lookout for things unseen, unquote, and to be faithful to, quote, an unopenable and unsayable symbols, to be faithful to unopenable and unsayable symbols. In the final scrutinies, After the perils he has endured, Jung acknowledges that, quote, it is not too difficult to cite a theory to explain my experience and join it to the already known, unquote. But being satisfied on intellectual terms alone does not satisfy, quote, or remove even the smallest part of the knowledge that I have experienced the God, unquote. I recognize the God by the quote, unalterableness of his experience. I recognize the God by the unalterableness of his experience. I cannot help but recognize him, but by the experience. But still he resists. Quote, I do not want to believe it, unquote. It is a sickness, quote, from uh, from which we must heal ourselves. Unquote. The culmination of all his inner trials, is the realization that God is our heaviest wound, unquote. This takes us to the condition, and so now I'm beginning with the new material. Good morning, everyone. Hi, Shri. Hi, Liberat, Jan, and Art. Nice to see you today. Let's see. Going on. This takes us to the condition of soul that evokes the shudder, a word and an experience with which several of Jung's contemporaries, like Nietzsche and Kierkegaard, also struggled. I preface this reflection with Jung's admission, quote, I no longer wanted to seek myself outside of myself, but within. Then I wanted to grasp myself, and then I wanted to go on again, without knowing what I wanted. And thus I fell into the mystery, unquote. He had already allowed the energy of a spirit, other than the spirit of the times, to be at work in his soul, the spirit that rules the depths and everything contemporary. In surrendering to the depths, quote, I had no choice, unquote. This is the source of the final inadequacy of the knowledge Jung had found so precious. What, quote, the spirit of the depths, unquote, was to give him, quote, you cannot learn. It can only develop in you, unquote. In this vulnerable state, he, quote, fell into the mystery, unquote. He had no choice because one immutable certainty for Jung was that, quote, I wanted my God at any cost, unquote. The cost was high, as the Liber Novus attests. The red book is Liber Novus. Okay, so let's just talk about that for a moment. Jung is the father of a Swiss Reformed pastor. He's at the beginning of the period of his main writing. He's having a midlife crisis as he's doing his red book, and he's realizing that the God that he was taught through his lifetime, through his boyhood, by his father and 7 of his uncles, scary as that seems, um, is not there. There's no God in the physical world that exists as it is described in the Bible, in anything that any preacher wants to define as God. It might be a part of God, but that's about it. And so, this is a fundamental sort of break with religious tradition that Nietzsche ran into, and Matthew Arnold ran into when he wrote Dover Beach. And and it left a lot of people at the end of the 19th century and the earliest 20th century simply empty. And they could go to church, but they said, so a lot of us said to ourselves, especially the mansplainers, said to ourselves, well, I don't believe in that God. What is that God? And I never had a preacher or a minister in a church that I went to who could properly explain it. And here, I mean, they all have certain sort of airy-fairy ideas about what God is, but they can't just say to you that God is within and that you have to find that God within yourself. And God has two eyes. They're your eyes, uh, you know, one nose and one mouth, and those are your nose and mouth. And uh, one set of skin for touch, and that is your skin. And and everything else in the universe. And that's a huge idea to swallow. And so what you have to do, each of us, all of us have to do is come to terms with what that God is. Uh, Jung, at one point, wrote to a pastor named David Cox. I read the letter on this YouTube channel, the letter to David Cox in 1957, and he said, I'm going to put my cards on the table. God is the unconscious, and it's your unconscious, and it's also the collective unconscious. And so, what the collective decides to do is what you get. And so, in our current affairs, that this shows up rather dramatically in the election of our new president, who is doing a lot of very dramatic moves right now. And um, we just have to see what the consequences of those are. Many of us were afraid of what the moves he would take would do to our country. We have only 1 week so far of experience, and so nothing has really taken effect that hard as yet. And it is true that, I used to go to the grocery store and pay like $2.57 for a dozen eggs. And yesterday I paid about almost $9 for a dozen eggs. So uh, something is wrong. I think I understand what it is, which is that the last time this man was in power, he um, increased the national debt by more than any other president in history. In fact, by more than the combination of all presidents in history uh, during their terms. It all adds up, of course. And so when you increase the currency is a commodity like any other, and you exchange that commodity for um, shirts or food or whatever, or automobiles. And because the currency it was just created out of thin air, $8 trillion worth of it, um, then it's worth less. Okay, because it has no intrinsic value by itself, the same as the Bitcoin and those sorts of things don't have any intrinsic value. They depend on everybody, the collective, if you will, believing in them. And the more people who create a new kind of cryptocurrency, the less any of them will be valued. and um, because they have no intrinsic value in themselves. They're, it used to be that our currency was tied to gold, um, at least loosely tied to gold. And so people thought they knew what the value of gold was, so therefore they knew the value of the dollars that are out there in space. But since we went off the gold standard, um, which is something that Richard Nixon did, now currency is tied to the full faith and credit of the United States, and the full faith and credit of the United States is quite strong. But what happened is that when our current president inflated the currency by $8 trillion last time around, that inflationary increase of dollars that didn't have anything behind them um, caused inflation, and Biden got blamed for it because it takes time for these things to work through the system. But nonetheless, it was a direct result of that inflationary action by the once and current president. And so he's doing the same thing again. And I fully expect that we will have huge inflationary pressures coming our way. And the very idea that he can bring prices down with his strategies, his macroeconomic strategies, is just ridiculous. Anybody that knows anything about macroeconomics will know that. And so, like that, God had a certain meaning to people up until the beginning of the 20th century. And then God lost that meaning, not for everybody. And obviously, God has a certain meaning to everybody who's religious and goes to church. And it means something to me as well. But I had to reassess and reevaluate what I know about God. And this is why um, on YouTube, when you hear you enter the question, do you believe in God? Or um, Carl Jung, do you believe in God? There's like a 1 minute video there, and you can hear his answer directly. And what he says is, I have no need to believe. I don't have to believe what somebody else presents me because I know. Okay, now he knew. And when I heard that the first time, I said, oh, well, I know too. And and then I had to spend a decade, literally a decade, working out for myself what it is I know, what it is that Carl Jung knew. And that required a lot of reading and a lot of consideration, reflection on all of his works, and especially the Red Book. And so, um, that's what we're about here. That's one of the main things that Jung was about, is, it's the opposite of Nietzsche's dictum, God is dead and we have killed him. Okay, yes, the God of our forefathers, who is this bearded guy in the sky, a la Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, um, that doesn't exist and never did exist. That was a metaphor that Michelangelo created for the purposes of his artwork. But and many people had that vision of God throughout their lifetime. But that doesn't that God isn't there, and you can really ask questions about that particular image, because what was he saying by the fact that God in that image is wearing what appears to be a pink dress? What the heck does that mean? and um, and so, there's a lot of things that we have to work through as we adjust um, our faith. And I can say it's my faith. And I'm with Jung. I believe what I know for myself. I don't claim to know for anyone else. And so if you're new to this, you're going to need to do some self-reflection, a lot of it in the context of these essays and other work. I've read the Red Book at least twice online, and we're reading it again in the advanced reading group. So I've put the MailChimp link uh, up in at the beginning of the chat today, the YouTube chat, and so you're welcome to come and join our advanced reading group where we're still working through the Red Book. Um, and let's see, just want to see how we're doing. Okay. All right. So now um, going on to the next paragraph. Whether I've read this or oh, okay, I have read it. Okay. So Jung was profoundly affected by Rudolf Otto's formulations of the holy, introducing the term that Jung took to heart, soul, and mind, numinosity. Otto's elaboration of the numinous, the Ganz Andeger, as the Mysterium Tremendum et Fascinans, haunts Jung's Liber Novus. This is the shudder of ecstasy and or terror that accompanies the incandescence. A horror crept over me. Thus I stood and was terrified. And then a gentler modality, quote, my soul whispered, unquote. Trembling and shuddering leaves one in no doubt of the reality of the psychic happening. Greek Phrake, the shiver of excitement, awe, dread. Jung valued this as necessary human response to a true religious encounter relating to its actuality. Even fairy tale lads had to go out into the world to discover what fear was, to learn how to shudder. In biblical records, fear and trembling is the essential reaction to the infinite or divine presence. Luther, Furcht und Zittern, Jung's immersion in the book of Job, familiarized him with Job's exclamation, quote, I am afraid and trembling seizes my flesh, unquote. Kierkegaard also uh, compelled by the Fricht och Bjerben, like the psalmist, all plead the fact that this is an involuntary physical reaction. Fear and trembling came upon me. Nietzsche, uh, unquote. Nietzsche constantly lays claim to the sensation of being shaken and overturned to his depths, unquote. As wonder after wonder came toward Jung's courageous eye, he, quote, saw and shuddered, unquote, not able to, quote, grasp the monstrous, unquote. And though he desires, quote, solace, unquote, he must endure the, quote, shudder before the greatest, unquote. Trembling in ecstasy is often the response to the, quote, shimmer, unquote, that lights so many experiences of the depths, though human desire for the shimmering can mislead and belie soul truth. Significantly, Philemon retires, quote, into the shimmering cloud of uncertainty, unquote, inevitably calling up the mystic's cloud of unknowing. Such unknowing has as much validity for the soul as transfiguration's clarity. Okay, now what he's talking about here is numinosity. And what that means is that you know. And I throughout my life, and especially since I'd say the last 20 years, I end up having numinous experiences nearly every day or every day. And as most of you know, I've been able to catch some of those on images. And so I'm going to tell one that most of my followers do know. But again, um, they it's so powerful to me because this happened to me. Okay, so I'm going to share it with you. First of all, I have to find my. All right, so here I am, and I'm going to share this experience. Now, what happened to me in this experience was that on September the 6th, 2016, I was very, very dejected. You don't have to know why, but I was really down. And I made a decision to go over to the Naval Academy Chapel and just sit in a pew and say a prayer. And so I did that. And it was a very dark day. It was very, very cloudy. And I went into the chapel. It was about 10:30 in the morning, and there wasn't a soul in the place. And this is a chapel that's the size of a European cathedral. It's called the Cathedral of the Navy. And in this church that seats 2,000 people, there are some pews that are perpendicular to the expected direction on the sides. So in the arms of the cathedral, going back on both sides, are pews that face the center rather than facing the pulpit. And if I go to sit on the right side of that, um, arrangement and look up, there is a Tiffany window that's in the chapel of the U.S. Naval Academy. It's a stained glass window that was created by Tiffany, who's known as the most amazing stained glass artist, maybe of all time. And when you see my image here, you will understand the qualitative difference um, between the Tiffany windows and other stained glass. But for now, um, I was very, very down. I sat in that chapel and I looked up at the Tiffany window, which shows Christ with his hands in the air, holding the sun. And I was in an attitude of prayer. And suddenly I realized that I was bathed in light. And I looked up, sort of wondering what that experience was. And this is what I saw. And when I saw it, I said, oh my God, if if I don't take a photograph of this, nobody will ever believe me later. But in any case, here in this image, you can see the three Tiffany windows right here. And down below, you can see a floor below because there's a balcony in between here. There's a balcony in the chapel. And beneath the balcony are these three stained glass windows, which are not Tiffany. And just in this image, you can immediately see that there's a qualitative difference between what Tiffany created and what the other stained glass artist did. But what I want to draw your attention to is that the sunshine was coming in, and I had these rays of light coming down right on me, and no place else in the chapel. You can see that there's no other lights essentially in the chapel. There might be one down here on the left, but it was a dark day, and suddenly this shine of light came, and it was coming only on me. And I said to myself, as I said, my God, I nobody will ever believe this if I don't take a picture of it. So I picked up my cell phone and I took a picture of it, and then I reversed it, reversed it to take a selfie. And you can see how bright it was on me and how dark what the rest of the chapel was. And so, for example, here to my right are two other stained glass windows. And I've had many people say that the one to my immediate right, looks like a gargoyle or something like that. But the reality is that is the crest of the U.S. Naval Academy. And so you can see the ship that's in the crest of the Naval Academy, and it's not in focus because the image is focused on me. But anyway, this is all the light, and you can see how dark it was outside that particular day. And so that's a numinous experience. And of course, I had seen many images in movies of, religious moments that are depicted in movies of light coming down on a person, and then um, that depicted a numinous moment in the movie, a divine moment, if you will. And surely it was a divine moment. And as you saw in that picture of me on that day, um, I was happy and smiling. And only 5 seconds earlier, I had been as dejected as I've ever been. And um, so that's a numinous moment. That's what it means. And I have moments like that. If you notice them, if you pay attention and notice them, you'll have these experiences too. Not all of them are as big as that. Not all of them are as easy to catch on um, to catch on video. I have made a video that you can find on this YouTube channel about my multiple experiences with numinosity. And those experiences make it so I know. Okay. And I don't have to have anybody's opinion that I know. I don't even care what you think, um, because I know what I know. Um, so anyway, all right, reading on. If you have any comments on what I've said here, please feel free to respond in the YouTube chat, and I will be happy to comment and speak to you about it further. But I want you to understand this. So this is what Miss Evett Secker is talking about when she says, if you have a numinous moment, then you're going to know, that there is God, and you know how important it is. But don't expect that you're going to see what Michelangelo saw, because Michelangelo is the only one who saw God in a pink dress, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so reading on. Paul Bishop reflects on Nietzsche's experiences of unprecedented shudders, expressing inner intensities, but he accepts the need for silence about them. This seems to be Jung's experience too, acting as Psyche's mouthpiece, advocate, and dramatist with astounding faithfulness, yet Jung ends up rather like Milton's chorus registering Samson's ending, quote, calm of mind, all passion spent, unquote. After so much eloquence and rhetorical power, as we enter scrutinies, we encounter a different speech, a new stutter and stammer. Jung perhaps comes to a similar place to that of T.S. Eliot in his wartime metaphor, capturing his intolerable wrestle with words and meanings by means of a, quote, raid on the inarticulate, unquote, when he is trying to be still, to let the darkness come upon him, quote, which shall be the darkness of God, unquote. Not muteness. The trying to find words continues. The sheer effort and imaginative stamina required for the writing of the Liber Novus, the Red Book, is remarkable. One hears repeatedly such comments as, quote, I am weary of hanging, weary of struggling after the immeasurable, unquote. Constantly, quote, seized beyond all measure, quote, unquote. But he persists even as he recognizes that, quote, this is beyond all measure, that this is beyond words. I refuse to understand such things. I can't speak about them without becoming enraged, unquote. Such experience takes him to the biblical place of the tremens et stupens, essentially speechless, trembling, and astonished. Accusations about Jung's messianic complex might find fuel in the Red Book, but they would be mistaken. There is certainly a sense of calling, a sense of election, having felt quite, quote, alone with before God from his youth, unquote. But the responsibility he felt to be his inescapable fate was far more that of a prophet than a messiah. His regression into stammering and stuttering communicates a sense of the numinosity, beyond words to articulate, perhaps also supposing the state of Moses, the stutterer, who needed his brother Aaron to speak for him. George Steiner suggests that the great critic will feel ahead, quote unquote. He will, quote, lean over the horizon and prepare the context of future recognition, unquote. He comments perceptively that the, quote, ineffable lies beyond the frontiers of the word, unquote. It was necessary for Jung to, quote, break through the walls of language, unquote, to do justice to his visionary experience. The task before Jung was exacting to translate immediate inner reality. Poetry is tempted by silence. Steiner avers, and to speak is sometimes to say less. Jung perceived that, like Moses, he was leading his followers into wholly new soul territory. The Red Book is a valiant attempt to create a language for the enterprise. Okay, so at this point, I just want to comment that almost everything, all the major events of the Red Book, about 80% of it occurred in one 10-week period. They occurred from Christmas Day 20, or I'm sorry, 1913, from Christmas Day 1913 to about the middle of March 1914. In that 10-week period, all of the visions, the major visions that are in the Red Book came out. Okay, the rest of it, scrutinies, is something that Jung thought about and did later, including the Seven Sermons to the Dead. But everything in Liber Primus and Liber Secundus of the Red Book occurred in this 10-week period. Now, you can imagine for a man who was living over a century ago, he was born in 1875 and died in 1961. Having this pile of dreams and visions all in one go must have been practically overwhelming to him. I'm sure it must have been. And he lucked out because he was a made psychiatrist already when these events happened. So he was able to pick his way through these experiences. And then he spent 16 years creating a scrapbook about this period and about the period of the scrutinies, which was a time when he was looking back on this period also. But most of them happened in this time. And it's also in this time that Jung discovers the collective unconscious, okay, because he has 12 dreams and visions between October 12th and August 1st, 1914, between October 12th, 1913, and August 1st, 1914. He has 12 dreams and visions, which are horrendous. They're frightening. They're just overwhelming to anybody. They would be overwhelming to anybody, even now. And these are the visions that once you recognize where they fit historically, you realize that he was seeing World War I coming. And he said that on August the 1st, 1914, he happened to be in Aberdeen, Scotland for a speech he was given, and he thought he was going crazy. He wasn't sure whether he was becoming a schizophrenic at this time. And when the war broke out, he realized that his dreams and visions weren't schizophrenia or some sort of mental disease, but were in effect prophecies, prefigurations of World War One. And so on August the 1st, 1914, he was the happiest person in the world because then he knew that he had discovered this collective unconscious and that all those dreams and visions had meaning. So Richard says, my God wears a seamless robe and it's faded red like his blood. Okay. And Jung was just a man, a creature like us. Quite right. Jung was just a man. And, if I knew him in real life, I might not have liked him very much. I mean, he was known to be a kind of rude eater who smacked his lips and stuff and ate like a peasant. Um, and and he was quite introverted, and so he kept to himself, and it would have been hard to talk to him, especially now I feel like I would be competent to speak to Jung, but for most of the time that I was studying his work, I wouldn't have been competent to speak to him, and it would have been he would have just blown me over. I mean, it would be like standing in the middle of a railroad track and having a train hit you to try to have a conversation with him, because he had all this stuff that he was carrying around with him. And even James Hillman, who's a very famous Jungian analyst of the last half of the 20th century, up until about 2012 or so when he died. But James Hillman recounts that, he had that sort of experience with Jung when he met him in the 1950s, that it was just an overwhelming experience. Um, and Richard says, Jung fell for the demons of the Dionysian mysteries, planted seed, and paid the price. Jung discovered nothing but spoke up on his visions like many alchemists of the past. And he was racist. Fair enough. He was also a male chauvinist pig. And so I don't defend any of those aspects of Jungian history. Okay, those are all valid comments. But Richard, I would say that when you say Jung fell for the demons of the Dionysian mysteries, I think it would be better to say that Jung um, came to know and experience the Dionysian mysteries and understand them for what they were. And, because humanity had been playing around with these general ideas, for example, the Oracle of Delphi, for thousands of years, 2,000 years, and 2,500 years, long before Christ. Um, and so these priestesses of the Oracle of Delphi used to, go into a cave that had know thyself over the entry to the cave, and they would sit over a crack in the earth from which some sort of intoxicating gas emerged, and they would say their prophecies. And so people would have kind of a drug experience uh, in the Delphi caves. And, a lot of wisdom came out of those, a lot of it. And over, at least 1,000 years. And so if you don't know about the caves of the Oracle of Delphi, or if you don't know about Delphi specifically, then you should look it up on YouTube and on Google, because um, this was a really going concern, and there are many monuments, etc., that are built up in this area, which is a fairly remote area of Greece, as I understand it. So it wasn't easy to get there, but people would come from everywhere in the world to visit that site, and it's still true. Although I don't think people have been building mausoleums there for maybe the last 100 years or so, but there are many artifacts that go back thousands of years. And so, humanity was tripping across these ideas in sort of general terms for literally millennia. And yet nobody really had put it all together until Jung came along. And then Jung found the living God, where the living God lives, and how the living God goes about and does the work of the Godhead. And so we may not like what God does, but nonetheless, Jung showed how it works. And he's, as far as I know, he's the first to put it all together. Um, let's see. So punk rock country mom says, darn, I wouldn't be able to eat dinner with him. Yeah, probably you wouldn't. And maybe I wouldn't be able to either. I don't know. And punk rock says, just found your channel in the spirit of synchronicity. I will finish the red book and explore your channel. Well, that's great. There are you will find that there are now over 1,400 videos on this channel, and many of them are quite long. And I apologize for that because uh, I never take anything down, and uh, I want you to experience what I've experienced. And in order to do that, you have to go back and start at the beginning. And I've been doing this channel now. This is the ninth year, the end of the ninth year. So there's a lot there. But I think a lot of it will make a lot of sense to people over many years. And so that's why I go about this every week, giving talks about how I and others have responded to Jung. Um, okay, so now let's carry on. Um, so, stammering in the field of incandescence, his own burning bush, one might say, took Jung into profoundest solitude. The solitary became a key figure in his drama, being alone with oneself. At the outset, at the outset, he had announced, I quote, I prepare you for solitude, unquote, for his soul had predicted the need to, quote, dark solitude, unquote. Being alone had to be born before he could be the man happy, quote, to be a hermit in his own desert, unquote. He must, quote, practice solitude assiduously without grumbling, unquote, for his, quote, way leads to the depths, unquote. Practice, quote unquote, practice is an active verb. Solitude at this depth does not come unsought. It is soul labor. The truth that is revealed in scrutinies is that though he might, quote, stammer like a miner, unquote, it is part of learning to be a soul, which must happen in the world of men. And so I would say that. I mean, over years, I can't say what exact. I mean, I can say why I began studying Jungian psychology, and it began because of interest I had in a woman colleague, as a matter of fact. Um, but as I read about, I mean, I was teaching in a graduate school where there was a young woman PhD, psychology PhD, and she wanted to tell me about the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And at first, I just found it really confusing and so on. So for 10 straight days, I insisted she have lunch with me and explain out to me what the Myers-Briggs meant. And then I did my own study of the Myers-Briggs, and I just I wanted an excuse to have lunch with this young woman who was quite beautiful, and and so I had an excuse, and she was very gracious and gave me her knowledge about the Myers-Briggs, and in that I discovered, the one of the offshoots of Jungian psychology, of course. And then after that, I kept reading. And about 3 years later, I was mainly reading about the Myers-Briggs in the hope it would help me with my business career, which it did very much, very much. um, and and then I was in 1990, I was in a bookshop on Capitol Hill, and Man and His Symbols found its way into my hand. Uh, the big, um, the big hardcover copy of Man and His Symbols, and it's out of print now, but you can find used copies of Man and His Symbols, the hardcover copy, and I urge you. I can just show you what I mean here. Um, in the hard copy, it has color plates, and so it's easier to follow with the color plates. Let me get rid of my cloaking so that you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's some color plates in Man and His Symbols, the hardbound copy, and I later bought the paperback copy also, but I mean, here's another one. Here's another plate, and I later here's a good one. You can just get a sense of it. Okay, but in the paperback version of this book, it's black and white and very small, and so I found it even myself less easy to follow. And so, therefore, it's really worth it to try to find a used copy of this book. And I've found several. I mean, I have occasionally given my copy away to friends, and so I don't do that anymore because they're hard to find, but it's really a valuable book. And what I did with this book then was in 1990, in the year 1990, I read this book cover to cover about 2 or 3 pages a night to my wife right before we went to sleep. I mean, we would get into bed, we'd be lying in bed, and I would read 2 or 3 pages to her. And at the end of the year, we both felt as if we'd both had a psychotherapy, and that really set me on my search. And then I began to read more and more Jung. I was traveling quite extensively in those days, and in those days I traveled 44 times to India in between 1993 and 2013. I traveled 44 times to India. And so I had a lot of long flights in which I could do this reading. And that's how I got into it very much. Uh, and let's see, Richard says demons are real and easily possess those who are far from God Himself, and the Holy Spirit is not in the mysteries. Those demons mock the Spirit of God. Yep, I agree entirely. Awareness, you can download a PDF copy of Man and His Symbols from Internet archive, and I agree with that. There is on Internet Archive, you can download a PDF of the entire color version, and I urge you to do that. Thank you for reminding me of that. Um, and Vincent says, what is the quaternary in contrast to the Trinity? Trying to understand Jung's axiom of Maria. Is it about humanity's realization of its connection to divinity? Um, well, the axiom of Maria um, is is a pretty simple axiom, and what it says is that, in very simple terms, if you don't know, one becomes two, two becomes three, three becomes four, and four becomes one again. And so the easiest way I've found to describe that is um, you are yourself one. When you marry, you become two. After you're married, you become three because you have a baby. Now you're a three, but you're also a fourth thing, which is a family. And that family is a one again. And so then you have a family of three is one. You have another baby that's two, the family and the other baby. And now you have the second baby becomes three, and that second baby now becomes a fourth thing, which is a family of four. And that family of four is now four people in the family, but that's a one again. And that's basically the way the axiom of Maria works. And so let me see what else we can say about that. Um, right. And so, and as far as the Trinity, um, you know, God the Father, God the Son, the Son should be son or daughter today, um, and then God the Holy Ghost is the third thing in the Trinity. But that's not the end of it, because if you believe in God the Father, God the Son, and then the Holy Ghost, uh, which is the Paraclete, where Christ um, said that he would return. He did, in fact, return. He's with us today, and he's been with us for 2,000 years. There's no doubt about that. And in the same sense that when your parents die, um, they never leave you. Okay. I mean, I love my parents every bit as much today, maybe more than as when they were alive. And and so they are quite definitely living within me. And it's just the thing that, Christ was telling us. He went to the cross knowing that he would return, that his teachings would be a teaching for all time, as they have been. And therefore, a quarter of the world's population follows Christ. And as many of you know, Tim Holmes, who is my sculpture friend, sculpted two images of Mary returning the nails from the cross. And the piece is called Returning the Nails. And um, his point, Tim's point, which is a living point, it was meant to be spoken for the last 2,000 years. It was my friend Tim who actually was able to express it as a symbol. And so the his image, which shows Mary, mother of Jesus, returning the nails um, to the the I'm sorry, the Roman authorities. Um, you know, Tim was at the time he was doing it, he was musing about how after Tiananmen Square, the Chinese government sent the families of the the protesters who were murdered um, at Tiananmen Square. They sent them bills to pay for the bullets that killed their children, and so that connected him up with what has always been there, which is iron was a valuable commodity in the time of Jesus Christ. And if they used iron nails in crucifying people, in most cases, they just tied people to the cross. But in Jesus's case, they used iron nails, as we know. And um, and so those nails would have had great value because it was hard to make iron in those days, still is, um, but a lot harder in Christ's time. And so he imagined Mary returning the nails because of their value. And, it's basically she's saying, here are your nails. You can have these. I'll carry the future with me. And absolutely, we don't have the nails, but we have Jesus Christ. And there's no doubt that his spirit still lives very definitely. Let's see now. We're in the age of the Paraclete. Does this mean we won't need the church? Is that like Protestantism? Well, actually, um, Protestantism says that you don't need the physical figure of Christ hanging on the cross. Um, but but Catholics feel that they do need that image. And I don't think that changes the fundamental religious view that um, Christ lives and still lives, and his spirit still lives in everybody that has ever heard of him. If if you're arguing about Christ is or is not, then Christ is because you're still arguing about it. Um, let's see. And Kathy says it depends on who you ask. I would say symbols are universal and collective, and signs are personal. Well, signs tell you one thing, right? Um, let's take a stop sign, right? A stop sign does one thing. It says if you're in the traffic pattern right now, you have to stop, right? So as a sign, that's all it does. But as a symbol, it is a symbol of everything that has gone before that relates to automotive travel globally. Okay. And so as a symbol, a stop sign is way more than um, than just telling you to stop. But that's a long discussion. Um, So, for example, I might see a cow as a personal sign of something meaningful, and the same cow is a cow to you. Well, especially yeah, uh, and so especially in the context of synchronistic timing, I agree. Oh my God, they sent them bills for the murdering them. Jesus Christ, that's horrible. Yeah. William Blake's poetry and art are a connection, absolutely. The cross is a recognized symbol in its many forms, definitely so. Can you say theology doesn't affect morality, or are those intertwined? Obviously, they're intertwined, and um, obviously, religions were used for various purposes. Um, throughout history. And so, I mean, I have children in my school who say, I don't have to do that. And they're right. Whatever it is that we ask them to do, uh, they don't have to do it. We can't make them. Okay, there's no, we don't live in a Roman society of 2,000 years ago. So if we ask a child to do X, whatever it is, they say, I don't have to do that. And, you know, the same is true of everything in the Ten Commandments. Then you don't have to do that. But society works a hell of a lot better if you do, right? And um, you if you go to church, what do you get? You get community. So if you're lonely, um, there's no place better to get community than at a church, because at least uh, the people there follow some standards, and so you know So Vincent, I would not say that theology doesn't affect morality. They're certainly intertwined, and you know, the question is, um, are you willing to be part of society with us, with the rest of us, or not? And in many ways, our new president has taken all of our standards and beliefs about what is right and wrong and just trampled on them. But uh, I don't believe that's going to turn out well. Okay. For example, he gives important secrets to people who have not been vetted, and those secrets can hurt us in many ways. And I served in the intelligence field basically my whole career in the Marine Corps, and and there's certain things that you don't want to know. I mean, it's like the fact, which I often talk about, of the fact that everything that you buy at the grocery store that you're going to eat was once alive, and it's sublimated so that, God, if you had to think about all the animals that have been murdered so that you could live, whatever those were, um, fish, fowl, or meat. Um, if you had to think about that, it would be crushing. But we sublimate it. We put, sides of beef in nice little plastic wrappers and make it look beautiful. Um, and so we can stand to purchase it without having to think about the slaughterhouse. But um, and we even sublimate that term now so that we call it the packing house. And so, um, if you want to think about everything in terms of its physical reality, nobody could survive. You couldn't eat because nobody could stand to go to the grocery store anymore. Um, so, you know, our customs, for whatever reason, are how we've learned to live and live in a brutal world. Okay, how can we survive in a brutal world if we don't follow certain conventions, right? And that's the issue. Uh, and Anthony's, let's see. So Anthony says, but yes, but will there be a second coming? Could it be any of us? Well, yes, surely it could be any of us. In fact, Christ is the second coming because the first coming was 500 years before Christ, and that was um, Gautama Siddhartha Buddha, um, the Buddha, um, because he gave us teachings, 84,000 of them to be precise, um, that were in Buddhism half a millennium before they were in Christianity. And many people think that Christ had been spent the 18 years we don't know about his life in India taking teachings. And whether you believe that or not, I don't care, but we only know Christ until about age 12, and then all of a sudden he shows up when he's 30. And so in that 18 years, uh, lots of things could have happened. We don't know. But I do know that there are some, uh, Buddhist temples or churches in India where Christ's presence has been um, asserted. None of us can know for sure, and so uh, what you know anybody can make a big splash, right? And the question is, do we honor that splash or not? I mean, do you honor the spirit of Adolf Hitler? Well, he was a painter. Um, he expressed his soul in paintings occasionally, and his spirit. Um, but do we turn to him for moral guidance? Pretty surely not. And so, yeah, you can be the second coming, but today being the second coming is a lot bigger deal than it was um, in the time before Christ or in the time of Christ in Palestine. Things have changed. And so now you reach many more people. I mean, uh, Jung was only reaching, for most of his career, he was only reaching a couple of dozen people with his teachings. But now look at it. Now look, he wrote um, many thousands of pages, thousands of letters. James Hollis once told me that there's still 100,000 letters of Carl Jung that haven't been published yet. And I believe it because in his time there weren't any there wasn't social network and so he had to work with a stenographer, and the stenographers typed up his communications in various ways, or he sent them by telegraph, I guess. Um, and now, boom, we can get an idea out into the world instantaneously. The question is, you know, does the world recognize those souls? Yeah, maybe. I mean, Greta Thunberg is an autistic girl from Sweden who has the attention of the world. She's in her early 20s, but she's been um, fighting the global warming issue for many years, and she's gotten a lot of attention. Is she a second coming? Yeah, sort of. Um, and so will you be seen as the second coming 2,000 years from now? Well, I couldn't say, but so what have you done so far? you know. Anyway, okay. Uh, Richard says, Kathy, I see crows as a intelligent, beautiful bird, but many people see them as dirty scavengers. So how can symbols be universal? I see a cow, I think of manure, others see cows and think of burgers. Yeah. Um, we are what we are. Richard, that's all hearsay about Jesus in Egypt. It's our quest to understand the mysteries of Christ. Well, right. I agree. And there's lots of hearsay in history. Um, you just believe what you believe. Mind you, I wasn't talking about Christ in Egypt because Christ went to Egypt um, in shortly after he was born to escape Herod. And I don't know how much he did in Egypt, but he came back to obviously to Jerusalem at some point. Um, and some think it'll be a collective ascension. Yeah, it will be because uh, Anders is a model for inner transformation, becoming Christ uh, by finding our own path. And, this is exactly the talk that my wife, Deborah McLaughlin, gave, and you can find it on this YouTube channel. Just type in her name, Deborah McLaughlin, and it will come up. Um, and she, um, you know, the point is, religions will give you a path, and at the end of the path, there's a cliff, and you have to step off of the cliff and have your own answer. Um, they can guide you, and they have guided hundreds of millions of people all over the world. And they all do it in their own way. And the what are we searching for? Salvation, for spirit. I've left my spirit with lots of youth over decades now. I've written 4 books and lots of other things. So, um, I'm not claiming to be the second coming by any means, but you know, you could argue that Jung was a kind of second coming. Uh, and Vincent says, Skip, I want to say thank you for making all this material available online. You've done a service for the world. I hope so. Who knows? Okay, let's read some more. Let's see if I can get through some more here. Uh, Gotta remember where I was reading. Okay, so we were talking about solitude, and Jung saying, "I prepare you for solitude," and so then we go on. However, being alone also makes any form of discipleship problematic. In this, Jung follows Nietzsche's protest. Quote, I now go away alone, my disciples. You too now go away and be alone. You had not yet sought yourselves when you found me. Thus do all believers. Therefore, all belief is of little account. Now I bid you lose me and find yourselves. Okay, and so that's the point. You have to find yourself. Um, Jung also urges, quote, your work would be completed if men managed their own lives without imitation, unquote. This prohibition of imitation is a particularly vital but problematic precept from the founder of a school of psychology. Nevertheless, he insists to those who would adopt his ideas to discover your own path. I warn you away from my own, unquote. He even invokes the metaphor of virginity. Um, quote, my secret remains virginal, and my mysteries are inviolable. They belong to me and cannot belong to you. You have your own, unquote. This is an exacting charge that many Jungians often disregard. The injunction that we must work out our own salvation with fear and trembling is laid down here as a guiding reflection associated with his wisdom figure, Elijah. Quote, he who enters into his own must grope through what lies at hand. He must sense his way from stone to stone, unquote. But in this, there is also ambiguity, for at the same time that he insists that there is no way but your own, uh, he must also accept that he must live as if you were the whole of mankind. Okay, so, that's fair observation. You have to live as if you're mankind, you're everyone, because there are 8.5 billion of us now, and we have to figure out how ultimately, at some point in the distant future, maybe 1,000 years from now, Jung thought 600, we're all going to have a common perception of who we are and etc. And we still haven't found any other beings in the universe, none, zero. We haven't, I have a friend who's an exobiologist. That's a person who studies biology and space. And my wife once asked her, um, what would be the high point of your career? And her answer was to find a microbe on another planet. To find a microbe on another planet. We haven't done that yet. And so, there's a long way to go. Okay, solitude and silence. So Jung typically profusely vocal and vociferous posits the end of speech in solitude and silence, claiming throughout that what he says is beyond words and beyond understanding, with or without understanding. His task is to be an extraordinary pioneering advocate of the reality of the psyche. Alison Bunyan's pilgrim can wake up from their underground adventures and images, and behold, it was a dream. When Alice is threatened by the Queen of Hearts' menace, she fights back with an assertion of the instability of unconscious action. You're nothing but a pack of cards. Jung, Jung does not have this option. Jung must go on taking his many selves seriously, continuing to listen to them in full consciousness. His inner figures do the fighting back. Elijah and Salome retaliating, quote, we are real and not symbols, unquote. Okay, so this is a very important idea of um, of Jung's. He called his book for the layman man and his symbols, and Jung thought of them early on as symbols of something. But um, but they assert back, we are real and not symbols. That's the point. Salome and Elijah within Jung were really there. Okay? They're in his psyche, they're real. Okay. Just like everything in your psyche is real. Okay. It's real. It's not a symbol. And then we can use symbols to understand things. Um, but um, but the things themselves that make up the symbols, those are real. Okay. If you see a cross on a building uh, across the street, um, that's real. That cross is real. But also it's a symbol, and it's a symbol of everything that's transpired since the time of Christ, and probably maybe before. Who knows how long the cross has been a symbol. Anyway, um, Vincent says, Skip, I want to say that thank you for making all this material available online. You've done a service for the world. Uh, we're searching for the truth, and you know, search within. You have to search within. That's the truth. um, and yeah, this is Skip. We haven't found them because word is out in the cosmos that we're expletive deleted. We explain everything we think we've discovered. So true. That's absolutely true, Kathy. And so what is gold? And in India, you'll find almost all brides are wearing an incredible amount of gold jewelry, and it represents value, of course. Um, but in most cases, it's borrowed. Okay, it's borrowed jewelry, uh, because most Indians cannot afford to have an incredible amount of gold bracelets or what have you. Um, and when we were in Hyderabad once, my wife bought a little tiny bracelet, no bigger than this bracelet here, my dragon's tooth bracelet, but less meaty than my dragon teeth. And it cost her $450, and it was based on the weight of the gold. And so, people show off a wealth that they don't have. Um, and I now live in an apartment. I'm glad that I do, because I couldn't keep up a home anymore. There was a time when I did all the mowing and all that stuff, the traditional suburban house husband stuff. But I am no longer physically capable. Um, and and so, I'm just as happy now as I was then, maybe happier. And so you know, having things cannot make you happy. You have to find something else. and it's within you. Happiness is within you. Um, so then she goes on. In defense of his method in Memory Streams Reflections, he speaks of Philemon, his psychic phenomenon, and as real personality. There are things in the psyche which I do not produce, but which produce themselves and have their own life. It was he who spoke, not I. It was he who taught me psychic objectivity and the reality of the psyche. The Red Book gives all figures the imaginative freedom to be and become as and what they must. If soul lives through imagination, then we must take seriously every unknown wanderer who personally inhabits the inner world. When I ask, where is my soul? How do I meet it? What does it want now? The answer is turn to your images. Every psychic process is an image and imagining. This is the legacy of the serpent. I give you payment in images, followed by the vision. Quote, behold, unquote. Okay. So your images are not my images. Okay. All right. We only have a short amount left, just 1.5 pages. So I'm going to try to keep going. So, in a moving exchange among Jung's I, Salome, and Elijah, he realizes his longing for the joy of men, for their fullness and freedom. He has now gained from the serpent hardness, wisdom, and magical power. And feeling that, quote, everything is completed in me, unquote, he also speaks of giving and gift. He urges a too submissive Salome, give to me out of your fullness, not your longing. She is urged not to forget to dance. Through the struggling after the immeasurable, after the solitude of the desert, the serpent tells him he, serpent, can now return to eternal glitter and shimmer, while Jung must return to his self, a giddy and pitiful figure, subject to ruthless scrutiny. In all that is experienced through his erring, Jung realizes the astounding truth that it is in the land of men he has leaned to be a soul, or he has learned to be a soul. Okay, so Jung himself was quite an individuated man. There's no question about that. Okay, the term personification has been much used to describe the multitude of figures who invade and inhabit Jung's unconscious. The Greek rhetorical trope, prosopopeia, goes deeper and further. For my purposes, Sonino's rhetorical guide quotes Quintilian aptly, quote, effects of extraordinary sublimity are produced when the theme is exalted by a bold and hazardous metaphor, and inanimate objects are given life and action. We display the inner thoughts of our adversaries as though they were talking with ourselves, or we may introduce conversations between ourselves and others. We are even allowed this manner of speaking to bring down the gods from heaven and raise the dead, while cities and peoples may also find a voice. We cannot imagine a speech without imagination, also a person to utter it, unquote. This paper is a personal response to a textual reading experience, not an attempt at interpretation. Only after attending to Jung's multivalent mythopoetic language Could I begin to digest its illuminating of individuation in extremis, in all its transforming, sometimes banal, beauty and wholeness? For the Red Book offers soul some respite in a global culture where fake fantasies confront us in the imagineering shadows of the times, and soul longs for imagination's true depth, for imagination's true depth. Um, so, you can go to a movie and have the results of somebody else's imagineering, and it's like, being given, um, piece of candy by your mother, let's say, but you still have to interpret it. So in our present culture, there is not a little suspicion of what Jung would call numinosity, where it is often allied with the dubious category of the romantic. Well, that's why I took a picture at the Naval Academy Chapel, because I said to myself, my immediate reaction was, nobody's ever going to believe this unless I take a picture of it. And so I was lucky and got a picture of it. Quantum physicists typically know better, often endorsing what one quantum scientist described as particularly transparent moments of encounter with the divine. Polkinghorne speaks of metaphor as a strategy of desperation, not a decoration, carrying us into regimes of thought which would otherwise be inaccessible. Torrance further suggests that whether we speak of the metaphorical character of metaphysics or of the metaphysical character of metaphor, what must be grasped is a simple movement that carries things beyond meta. This is the energy with which Jung's Red Book grabs us and the territory into which the Red Book takes us. Um, my time spent wandering with Jung in these eerie ways that prepare us for what that is to come, leaves me pondering what it is to be serious about the search of one's soul in the interacting fields of psychology, theology, art, and poetry. In all these realms, I now recognize not rigid atheism, but a valuable hermeneutic suspicion at the disposal of psyche. I end with such a feeling, such a drive, confessed by one poet finding himself in a sacred place. Quote, "It pleases me to stand in silence here, a serious house on serious earth," unquote, where he surprises, quote, a hunger in himself to be more serious and gravitating with it to this ground, unquote. Last paragraph. After the compelling but searing intensities and hyperboles of Jung's inner incandescence, I resonate with a new valuing, a refrating of the adjective serious. Such a mood also prevails at the end of Jung, who returns to a humbler self, a giddy and pitiful figure, who makes a solemn declaration, quote, "I decided to do what was required of me," unquote. This touches a sensitive chord in the contemporary psyche, in the estranged souls of those who also, quote, "want to go on living with a new God," unquote. Okay, so that is Josephine's essay. I was reading, let's see, I got to get back to what I was reading here. Um, I was reading, quote, this incandescent This Incandescent Matter, Shudder, Shimmer, Stammer, Solitude by Josephine Evans Secker. And I thought it was quite an excellent essay, and I'm glad we read it together. It took a while. And next week, we have another wonderful essay from Ann Casement, who regretfully recently died. She died about Christmas time. But Ann Casement was a force of nature in the Jungian analyst community, and her essay is entitled O Tempora, O Mores. O Tempora, O Mores. And I find marking this essay, which might amuse you, a newspaper article about me, believe it or not. And this is about, unfortunately, I never wrote the date on this essay, but you can see that I'm much younger and before I was gray entirely. And I had been putting some of my paintings in the bathroom at a local coffee house. And so one of those paintings was stolen. And so theft brings artist notoriety. It's the title. And there's a quote from me in which it says, "At this point, the stolen painting is making me famous, so whoever has it can have it with my blessing, but only for that one." Unquote. That's when I thought I might do art to sell art as a way of making a living, but I decided against that, and I'm glad I did, because I ultimately found that doing art is, first of all, my method of communicating with my own unconscious. And if other people like it, yeah, fine, that's great. But it's first and foremost for me. Now, so Kathy says, happiness, contentment, and inner peace are gold, truly valuable and valued by the wise. And Cherie, Jerusalem is calling all. And Richard, magical power is a delusion. The devil will tell you these are your children and they will do magic for you. Heraclitus claimed that the way was up and down. Every angel has its devil, and every devil on Jung, what he called enantiodromia, which means the tendency of things to change into their opposite. And that's the one word I use to reconcile our new president, because there was an article in the paper today saying that our president is at the peak of his power, and I agree with that. Of course, he is at the peak of his power, but once you're at a peak, there's no place to go but down. I'm sure he said, "Love the reading today. Thank you, Skip, and everyone." Andrew, I've read by several, including by Dr. Jung himself. We must do our own inner work, and that his explorations, especially the Red Book, are his own and not necessarily for us. Obviously, studying his work is enormously instructive, but at a certain point, do you think it's somewhat fascination of our own egos to too much attach oneself to Jung's process? Is there a point at which we become distracted from our own depths? And I would say, yes, that's certainly true. Um, and, Jung himself says right at the beginning of the Red Book, don't follow my path. Um, you have your own path. And, when I speak about these things, and, okay, there's a certain amount of ego involved in me. Doing this twice a week. Sure, okay, I'll acknowledge that. Um, and and yet nobody else is doing it, so I thought I might as well, and I don't feel the need to get paid for it, so uh, I just have gone ahead and done it anyway. Um, and For me, uh, it's a kind of religious practice. It's a spiritual practice. And, follow me, don't follow me. It's up to you. Um, and Cherie says, I wrote a poem, Jerusalem is calling all. Absolutely. Kathy, Andrew, what that's why I'm not a follower of any one prescribed person or model per day, uh, per se, I think. Fill in the blank obsession is cruel. Yeah. Uh, and she says per se. Uh, And Kathy says, sure, perhaps you'll log on sometime and read yourself for us. That would be great. If there were 1,000 people doing the same thing I'm doing with your own work or others, knock yourself out. I'm just talking from my own experience, what I've gotten out of it, and I realize that everybody's on their own journey, and if my journey and my thinking about my journey can help you, or my wife thinking about her journey as a Tibetan Buddhist, sort of unordained Lama, you know, she and I get along perfectly well, although I don't prostrate myself to Tibetan Buddhist monks. In fact, I don't prostrate myself to anyone because my knees can't take it anymore. And uh, fortunately, feel blessed that I have, um, as of right now, 20 people watching. I know I've seen as many as 26 today in this, and there are a lot of people that seem to care about these sessions, so that's all I need. Um, and Richard says, pray for Trump to gain some sense of humility and true wisdom, which is when you have the respect of all men. Yeah, obviously. We have to pray that he gets those things because we're stuck with him for 4 years. Um, all things considered, and I would hope he gains some wisdom this time. I know that because of a lot of things that he's doing, a lot of the things he's doing are going to blow up in his face, and he blamed that in the first administration on people that were disloyal to him. He doesn't have that excuse anymore. Um, so it's all him. And he's made his bed and now he's got to lie in it. But the problem is, so do the rest of us. Um, Andrew says, thanks for your wisdom. Been following since you had less than 500 subscribers. Yeah, and now it's, I think, close to 21,000, if I recall. I don't recall exactly. 20,900, according to today's statement. But, you know, that and $5 maybe buys me a coffee at Starbucks. And sure, he says, my pipe's frozen. My well is off because of the cold weather. I still have water just to fix the pipes underneath the farmhouse. That is 250 years old. I'm not complaining. Boy, I know how that is, Sherry, because my family had a farmhouse that was 225 years old. And when my father died, I was dying. Asked him if he would give my share of it straight through to my daughter so it wouldn't go through my estate. And he agreed to do that and did that. And the result was that my sister and my three daughters sold the farm, and my cousins also had a share and sold it. So I no longer have that, and I fortunately live in an apartment building where I don't have to worry about it anymore. Um, your grandpa built it. Yep, my ancestors had built our farmhouse, and um, there's the chimney that they built about 1920. I don't know if I could find that picture quickly, but he built, I guess it was my great grandfather when he was a young farmer, um, built a chimney on the side of the house so he could have a fireplace. And he had the stones sticking out a little bit at the height of my father, top and bottom. So my father could stand on one stone and have another stone at his head, at the top of his head. And that showed how tall my father was at the time that chimney was built. So about 1929 or 30, I guess. And that chimney never drew smoke. It was hopeless every time we had a fire in the fireplace. The place filled with smoke. Um, so you can build things with your hands, but be careful what you wish for if you don't know how to do it. And it's clear my great grandfather did not know. And yeah, the chimney was made of rocks. That was sure. Um, so we finally bought an iron stove that had its own chimney, and we ran that stone chimney out the main chimney, and then it worked. Then we could have heat, but we could have heat in the iron stove, not in the fireplace, and that finally worked. That was my father's solution. Okay, so here we are. It's 12 noon, and thank you all for being here. It's been a fun ride as usual. It would have been easier on my throat if I had colleagues to chat with as we went along in the panel. So at the beginning, and let's see if I can put it on again. Oh, magic. Okay, there's the MailChimp link so that you could register to receive notices of where to come every every time we have a session. And there's several check marks you can put. You can join us with the Wisdom Path. You can join us on Sundays, on the Wednesday advanced reading group. You can join us if we're going to be doing something special for your area. For example, if you want to put down that you're interested in things about Asia, then click that in, and we might notify you then. Um, But anyway, everybody's welcome as long as you're not disruptive. We accept all opinions. Totally ecumenical in that way. Anyway, peace, everyone. I have to go back and do my work now, so I'll talk to you later. Bye bye.